right now more on that new reporting out of the Washington Post on the president and his handling of all things Russia and interference in the U.S. election. Sources tell the Washington Post that the president refuses to accept the claims that Russia meddled in the election. We've seen that firsthand from the president. And also, really importantly, that he's never held a cabinet level meeting on this issue.
All right, joining us to discuss, Democratic Representative Engel of New York. He is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, has skin in this game to be sure. Congressman, the fact that the president has never convened a cabinet level meeting on Russian meddling, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that he's not serious about trying to find out what the Russians did or didn't do in the election, and also not serious about confronting Russia. It just makes me scratch my head. I mean, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to understand that the Russians interfered with our democracy. They try it not only with the United States, but with our allies of Great Britain and France and Germany. And only the president denies it. Everybody else knows it's true.
Okay, but devil's advocate here, I mean, the White House has not revoked the sanctions that were passed almost unanimously by Congress against Russia. Nikki Haley said, in fact, they've already been implemented. The White House has not handed back those two big diplomatic compounds here in the Northeast that we took from Russia at the end of the Obama administration. You could make the case, sir, whatever the president thinks, his actions aren't reflecting that. Fair?
No, I think it's not fair, because I think that we need to look at this in a much more serious way. It's not a matter of giving penalties back to the Russians. It's a matter of finding out what really happened. The president is in denial. He's in complete denial. He was in denial from day one. He likes Putin. He thinks Putin's a great guy. Putin, I don't have to tell anybody that everybody knows Putin invaded Crimea, invaded Ukraine, and is trying to disrupt the NATO alliance and the European Union. Putin is not a friend of this country, but the president is in denial because Putin smiles at him and he thinks Putin's a friend. I just think it's ridiculous. I think we need to investigate and let the chips fall where they may, but we can't do it if the president just keeps denying it and tries to impede it.
If I can, I want to ask you a little bit about the investigation right now into Russian meddling. Actually, it's not part of that investigation directly. It has to do with these text messages sent by Special Agent Peter Strzok, who was fired from the Mueller investigation, or removed from it, reassigned. One of the messages that came out yesterday was this. Peter Strzok is writing, this woman, Lisa Page, says, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office," which is an apparent reference to Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, "that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. He's talking about taking out some kind of insurance policy against the notion that then Donald Trump would be elected there. Is there any benign explanation for writing that, do you think?
No, I think wasn't a smart thing to write, and I understand that it causes a lot of trouble, but it doesn't take away the bottom line that we have to look beyond an individual president or whomever else and see what's good for the country. And if the president is in denial and keeps throwing roadblocks at every step, then it really impedes the investigation. Mr. Mueller is impeccable, impeccable integrity. The White House initially even said that. Now there's been these attempts almost every day to discredit him, to make him look bad. Some of us are worried that the president may even fire him. I think it's really important that we say that Congress will not stand for that, and we want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Okay. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, yesterday said in this testimony that no one has asked him to fire or even look into firing Bob Mueller, and he's the only one who could do that. Look, we know that the Inspector General is investigating all of this right now, these text messages after they came to light, et cetera. If the report from the Inspector General comes back and says that indeed these text messages do show political bias that actually swayed the Hillary Clinton email investigation, for example, that has been closed, do you think that would be ground for a special counsel to investigate that, or a secondary investigation once again into that?
Well, it's hard to talk about theoretical things that haven't happened or may or might not happen. The bottom line is that I want Mr. Mueller to just do his job, which he's doing in a very good way, And let's find out where the truth is. Let's find out where let the chips fall where they may. But this terrible attempt to discredit him as if he's some kind of partisan, which he absolutely is not, just really bothers me. You know, it takes you back to the Nixon years, and that wasn't a shining time for our country.
If I can circle back to the Washington Post story, one of the things it suggests is that Vladimir Putin and senior Russian leaders think that what they did in the election was a resounding, if incomplete, success. Do you agree?
I'll bet that's what they think, and I think it was a success, and the fact that it's coming out more and more, the things that they did to try to influence the election. You know, we're not just talking about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. We're going to have lots of elections in the future, and we have to keep one step ahead of the Russians, not the other way around. So what's clear to me is that it's clear to everybody except the president that the Russians interfered with the election. I would be just as angry if they interfered with it on behalf of Hillary Clinton. To me, it doesn't matter who it's in behalf of. It's a matter of, I don't want the Russians to try to strangle our democracy. And we are now privy to a lot more things than we were prior to the election. And we have to work together to make sure that this doesn't happen again. If the president is in denial and keeps saying that it didn't happen, then he sets a tone which discredits any kind of conclusion that any kind of governing board or any kind of investigation would bring forth. And so I think the president is being not helpful at all. He's keeping his eyes closed. He doesn't see reality, and he looks about how it affects him. He should look about how it affects the country.
Congressman Eliot Engel, we appreciate you coming on the program today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, coming up next, we're going to take you back to Beattyville, Kentucky.